Hello and welcome to the Trail Network podcast. I'm Leah Yingling, and on this week's episode, I'm joined by co-host Katie Asmuth. We debrief all things UTMB this year. It was an incredible year to follow the race. So many breakthroughs on the women's side especially, and some awesome underdog performances on the men's side. We talk about my experience being out there, crewing my husband Mike, and then Katie's experience following along at home. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome, everybody, to the Trail Network podcast. I am your host, Katie Asmuth, and I'm joined by co-host
Leah Yingling.
And we are here to talk all things UTMB week. I am so excited to finally get to chat, Leah. How was your week in Chamonix?
Oh, it was awesome. I think every year when UTMB week rolls around, if you're following along at home, you can see just how electric it is out there. And I think expectations and reality completely are met in every single way. Like the presence on the ground out there is wild. The race itself is as electric as it looks. The energy, the town, like everything was so much fun. I had spent the 3 weeks prior in Switzerland in like more quiet places, and getting to Chamonix was like, boom, right in your face. Crowds, energy, people everywhere, people you know everywhere. And I had the special privilege of crewing my husband Mike out there this year, which was just a journey in itself and so much fun.
Okay, big difference compared to last year, because last year you were racing UTMB. Yeah. I'm curious about the difference between Chamonix this year crewing Mike at UTMB, and then last year when you were gearing up to race, doing the Western States UTMB double, which you dominated, by the way. But just curious of those kind of takeaways of like, did you feel, was there a difference in the air? Did you feel like there was bigger hype this year? Were you kind of in a different perspective last year, so you weren't really seeing that same hype? Kind of what were the differences for you?
Yeah, that's a good question, because this year I saw people kind of around social media and everything saying like they felt like there was less hype going into UTMB this year than prior years. And like maybe there weren't the weeks long, like the 2 weeks long hype going into UTMB, but I definitely found that the energy in Chamonix, the people in Chamonix, this felt bigger this year. I don't know if it actually was. It felt bigger. It felt like a lot more energy. And I felt like the race week, the hype was definitely real. And we had a lot of media covering it, a lot of eyes looking at it. So I found like it felt a little bit bigger and like kind of pretty electric this year. I think last year, maybe that's in part from laying low for a lot of race week. This year too, like we did try to stay kind of like off the premises as much as possible and just chill out, because it's so easy to get fully sucked in. I think when you're out at UTMB for the first time, like 100% immerse yourself in all of it in every single way. Same with Western States. I think being that we've been out there a couple times now, it's kind of nice to lay low and be just outside the madness, which is what we did. So it's like a great reunion where you get to see all your buds, a lot of your friends from abroad who live out there as well. And then there's a lot of teams like Adidas, for example, that just like they spent a full month out there in their house together as a team. And I gotta say, like, that's a lot of time to be spending with a lot of people. So I'd imagine if there's like any
Leah's worst nightmare
introverts on that team, I could see.
Dude, I would love it. I'd be all about it. I'd be like, I want the whole team for the whole month. I want to keep it going. I would be sad to leave.
100%. Like that's, you would thrive. So it was definitely cool. I will say I had a lot of FOMO this year not racing. Mike and I had toggled back and forth quite a few times early season when we were making our plans, being like, okay, who's running UTMB this year? Should we both do it? But I think I've said many times before, I just like really need his energy and like require his presence. as somebody that grounds me on my crew. And I've recognized that in several races for my mental health. So we knew then a few months ago that only one of us was going to do it. And it was definitely his turn to do it this year. So it was hard from like a racing perspective to be on the sidelines watching the race go down and be like, oh, I think I'd be like right around there, blah, blah, blah. And it's so easy to say that whenever you're not racing the race and not in it.
Yeah.
But it was so cool. And yeah, we can get into the crewing side of things in a little bit. But yeah, how are you taking all of the race week media in, and how are you consuming it? Because I think the live stream has iterated over the last couple years. I think it's pretty easy to follow these years, but I know with like commentary and whatnot, it's changed and evolved. And I know it's not exactly easy to consume, like, let's say CCC, for example, from the US, especially when you're in Pacific time or Mountain time.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you were following along last week?
Yeah. So a couple things. I'll speak a little bit to my experience with UTMB in the sense that I've been wanting to race CCC for the last 3 years. Like that has been the plan. And really like, it's like Western States CCC is like the goal. Mm-hmm. And haven't been able to toe that line because of my freaking injury, which I am now recovered and actually back running, Yay! Which is really exciting. But so I went to Chamonix last year for the first time, and it was epic. I got to crew my friend Leah Yingling, you might know her. It was such a sick time. Like I went over there doing media with Free Trail, and really Saucony just was like, you already have your tickets. Like, we're so sorry you're injured, but go like explore the area, have fun, crew your buddy, like whatever. And I was like, so nice. Awesome. So I lived it up. Pete and I went, we had so much fun. It was so much fun crewing you and feeling like a part of the day, and really felt that electric vibe. Like it was everything and more. I felt like you walk down the street. Well, I was on a scooter, but my new scooter, walking down the street going, seeing all of your friends. And it felt like it was just this massive reunion. It was just really, really fun. Then all of the stuff came out with UTMB last year, with Corinne being fired from live commentary. And then of course, Gary Robbins, all of that happened. And I was really shell-shocked and just bummed out, like pissed off and angry, and just like what's happening to my sport, and all of this, right? And so I announced last December, was like publicly, which something I never do, but I was like, I'm gonna like, stick it to the man. Like, I'm not gonna go. I'm frustrated how they're treating people and how they're kind of acting in the sport. Like this is the leader of our sport, and they need to step it up. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I'm not going to race CCC. Fast forward, I, had to have surgery again, and it was the whole thing. So couldn't race again anyway. But I will say that I tried to take the higher ground in a lot of ways, and worked really closely with the Professional Trailrunning Association, PTRA, and with the Women's Equality Group, and really trying to work very hard to make change versus just sit back and complain. And that felt good. It felt like a really positive development of relationships. And at Western States this year, had some really good talks with the leadership of UTMB. And it felt like we were like going in a really positive direction, like the countless number of meetings I've had with UTMB about, equal coverage in the live stream, for instance, and making sure they had tampons at aid stations, which they didn't always. But things like this, mm-hmm. We worked really hard to make sure that they were hearing us. And they heard a lot of things. And the last meeting we had with UTMB was like, we've doubled the number of crew passes we've given to women this year. And we're like, awesome. How many do the men get? Mm-hmm. And it was like, you went from 11 to 25 car passes for women, but the men have 43, mm-hmm. And it was like, you don't get it, mm-hmm. So it's like these baby steps forward, but then like not quite hitting the mark. And I think that's what I took away from UTMB week, where at least the live stream coverage for me felt as if like steps forward for sure. Mm-hmm. Was it perfect? No. Yeah. And was there a lot of things we need to work on? Yes. Did I really enjoy the live stream? Yes. Did I feel like there was a lot of things I wish could have changed? Yes, But I do think there was a big step forward. I am one to, like, I really, really care about this sport, and I want us to just only get better. And I think that UTMB leadership has a really big impact. And it's interesting. Like, where is UTMB in our sport? Right? They're the leaders. Like, I want to say Western States is leaders because obviously I care about Western States more than anything. But I mean, like, UTMB is. They really are. And I mean, after you go, like, Leah, you catch the bug.
Yeah.
Like, how can you not? Right? So I will say I watched a lot of the coverage. There was a lot of like, following Hayden during CCC for like hours and then just listing off the top 10 women. And you're like, duh, come on. This is exactly what we've talked about not doing for like months and months and months in all of these meetings. So there was a little bit of that, of like this activist frustration. But how do you like not get pumped?
It's hard not to. And
it's like,
it's an interesting juxtaposition and like dichotomy of feelings.
Yeah.
Mike was writing some notes this morning about his race, and he was reflecting on his start line at UTMB. And I mean, it's impossible to not get teary when you're on that start line. Like, you've come a long way, you've done the training, you're about to conquer this gigantic loop around Mount Blanc that is a historic route against like the highest level of competition in the sport. And so he was reflecting on the fact that he was tearing up, and he's like, I never thought a corporate greedy organization like Iron Man would be the reason that I'm tearing up on the start line. And he's like, those are interesting feelings to have. And I think that's how a lot of people in the sport feel. It's like, it's a really special race, and it's the highest level of competition. It's so fun to follow along. But yeah, we're kind of at this crossroads of kind of almost justifying our feelings sometimes,
because we want it to work. Yeah. Like, we want it to be good. I think because that feeling that he had, that all of those runners have at that start line, transcends all of it.
Yeah.
Like, all of the BS. It's like that feeling is real. It's personal. It's bigger than yourself. And like, sport is so fun. We're all just like these athletes, these true sport fans at heart. And we want to watch people throw down. You want to be on that start line chasing ghosts of historic races. And I just feel like, yeah, it's hard not to root for it. And it's hard to not root for these, like, I mean, watching people throw down, like the storylines that came out of the day. It's the best part of sport. It's so fun. Like, how do you not want to be a fan? So anyways, yeah, that juxtaposition is real for me, and in like big ways.
I appreciate you sharing like your part with the activism side of things too, because I think it's really easy to sit back and have a lot of feelings and be frustrated and not do anything about it. But it really does start with movement and, letting UTMB know how we feel about what we're seeing, because sometimes like they don't have the vision that we as women in the sport do. We as, like, let's say American women, like our perspective that we're seeing at the Canyons 100K live stream coverage, like being able to share how it's making us feel, like they don't see it the same way. So letting them know and letting them hear us. So I do think, like you mentioned, a lot of strides have been made in the last year in UTMB just listening rather than completely going on the defensive immediately. And I think a lot of progress has been made. And like you mentioned, it's not perfect. Hopefully we get there someday where we all can look at it and be like, that's perfect. But yeah, probably won't quite get there.
Yeah, I definitely want to be there. I think it's like, I couldn't this year, obviously, because my injury, but I wouldn't have anyway, because it was like, I'm not ready to show up to that. Yeah. I'm not ready to give them the money, like I feel I'm not ready yet. And I also feel like I'm getting closer to feeling that I'm ready to show up, because they are working with us and they are trying and they are listening, and it's a huge organization. And it's, it's funny. I was thinking about Aravaipa, and, when we do live stream with Aravaipa, how there's like one, maybe two people like behind the screens deciding what images to put on the screen. And then I was looking at, I don't know if you saw this, but Steph Case on her Instagram stories put a bunch of these images of what the broadcasting room looks like at UTMB. And it's like, I don't know, 50 people, and it's wild. And there's like screens everywhere. It looks like a NASA like control center, I'm like, whoa, it kind of takes a step back of like, wow, this is a lot. And there's a lot of moving pieces here. And so, yeah, I think it takes understanding on both sides about kind of the the elephant in the room is we want equality, we want sustainability, we want to treat other race directors with fairness and justice, but it's also like this huge corporate organization that has a lot of people working behind it. So it's just interesting. Totally. Yeah, different culture for sure. Anyways, okay, so let's get down into the dirty. First, do we want to talk about Mike? Do we want to go there? Do we want to talk about kind of our
I'll touch on Mike's
like
race.
Takeaways, favorite moments?
Yeah. So my day out there was crewing Mike. He's in an interesting position in the field in that he's not the highest level elite as UTMB would term elites, but he's kind of this like sub-elite category where he qualifies for the shuttle passes. So honestly, there's good and bads of crewing somebody by utilizing the shuttles all day long. I think if they're in a position where they are kind of that like sub-elite, kind of chasing some of those guys who are right there, it's tough to do it via shuttles. And I think this probably is true for the women too, who don't get the bus pass or don't get the car passes like you were discussing. So my whole day was conducted via UTMB shuttles, which was very challenging. I would have had Mike run his splits into Lake Contamine. I would have missed him by 10 minutes. Lucky for me, but very unfortunately for Mike, he had the worst part of his day between mile 0 and mile 18 at Lake Contamine. So he had a really rough time in those first 3 hours, and we did a full reset at Lake Contamine, and then he got it done from there to the finish running. He was the 100th male, and moved up.
There we go.
Moved up from after falling back to I think 600. We were just talking about the 611th at Lake Contamine. Moved up to like 115th or so overall by the end of the day. So moved up 500 spots from his mental breakdown at mile 18, but got it done. Really like just tough, confusing day for him out there in those first few hours that kind of derailed it, but had a really solid day after that. Like we just keep saying, it was pretty like average and inconsequential from that point forward, and was a good day nonetheless, and really proud of him for closing the loop. I think something he's struggled with in the last couple years with 100 milers is having really big lofty goals, and he's not somebody that's like will not DNF at all costs. Like he is very friendly with DNFs and will DNF if it's not like if he's not having fun anymore, if he's not seeing a purpose in it. So I think something for him, he really wanted to prove to himself, like when the going gets tough and like my goals are out the window, what are we here for? And it's to get it done. Whereas that's not his goal in some races. Like some of his races, he comes there with like the goal to break the course record or do something along those lines. And if he's not having that day, like he kind of comes into that race saying like, this is like what I will do kind of. So this was an interesting one in that, got it done despite the toughness. Definitely was a good day nonetheless, running just under 28 hours, and was just so inspiring seeing him finish it and work through like really, really tough moments. We kept saying his race was almost like in reverse. Normally people have their big bonk and their lowest moments in like the last 3 hours of a race. His just happened to be at hour 2 when I got a text message that said, I'm having a really rough start to this already. This is going to be a long day. And I was just like, oh
no. Okay. You're on the shuttle going.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, it's good for the timing because the shuttle's not going to get me there in time anyhow.
Yeah. Oh, man. Okay, so what does he... I wish we were talked about maybe he would come on today.
Yeah.
As our special guest, but he wasn't feeling so hot. What does he think went down? Have you done some problem solving here, or is it just like
it comes down to a few things? The biggest things he was struggling with was his heart rate was just immediately extremely high on the flat river path section, which is easy, and he was running easy. And then it's his legs felt like jello for the first 15 miles, especially between Saint Gervais and Lake Contamine, to the point where it was pretty much everything that was runnable was like almost forcing him to a walk. And then all the downhills, he was getting like extreme side stitches. So just this conglomerate of issues. It was warm, but it wasn't too hot. It was very humid. We're trying to troubleshoot just like the pre-race nutrition now. We learned a lot from his 100-mile DNF back in June as to like, there's a huge like high carb craze right now. That doesn't always work for everybody. And if you are going to do that, you really need to match it with sufficient hydration as well. And when it's really hot out, you really need to alter some of those carb goals as well. So we learned a lot from that DNF. We implemented a lot of things here. I still think there's some slight tweaks with nutrition that are a little tricky. And he's had a lot of limitations physically in the last year with a herniated disc in his back that I think kind of contributes to a lot of the jello leg sensations in his posterior chain. So we said the other day, we're like, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just he's got some like physical limitations in some ways that like actually prevent him from, you know, certain things in these races that like I don't actually experience myself. So I don't know. I really do think he's capable of like between 22 and a half and 24 hours at UTMB. And I think we've been talking about rotating years where I'll run UTMB and he'll run it. So hopefully he gets another attempt there because I know this one was really special.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of people have that first experience at UTMB like this. I mean, it's interesting the aftermath of like some people have the days of their life, like obviously breakthrough performances, but a lot of people don't. Like a lot of people crash. And, you know, I mean, I don't know if we want to talk about this as a theme, but something we talk about in sport lately in trail running is that people don't blow up like they used to, right? Like people are just fast and they hold on and they've got the fueling and the cooling and people got it down, right?
Execute at this point.
You just execute. At UTMB, it's like everything changes and we still haven't figured it out. People still absolutely blow up. They can have the training of their lives, the most vert they've ever had, and still absolutely just that course just crushes people. And it's like we, as a community, we haven't figured out the secret sauce, you know, like it's just interesting. Yeah, I don't know. It's not a marble in a groove.
No, and I think like one of Mike's mindsets going into this year, like his ultimate goal was to try to break the top 20. And yeah, if you ran one of those times I said between like 22 and a half hours and like 24 hours, you were pretty much in the top 30 this year. So definitely a reasonable goal, doable. I think somebody like Canyon Woodward was in that kind of like in that group this year, and he was second American. And I guarantee you going into this race, he probably never thought he would be second American at UTMB this year, given like the people that were lined up for that. So like you mentioned, there's just so much that happens out there, but there's so much that can go wrong too. So much that can go wrong.
Well, and that's what makes performances like Katie's absolutely out of your mind, where you're just like, how do you have that consistency? You know, because then there's people that have figured it out, you know, and you're like, well, how do you do it? I mean, even Marianne, I would say like she has had a rough back, you know, 30 miles of the last, you know, her last two UTMBs, but I will say she still podiumed at both. So it's like, she figured something out, right? Like there's people that are able to consistently be in that top, which I find is just really fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing different?
Yeah. I also think the comparison of the men's and women's fields and the attrition in each is really interesting, especially at this year's UTMB. For example, like the men's side, the top 10 was run in the same time that the top 10 is always run. We saw a very fast winning time, one of, I think, the third or fourth fastest time ever there. So that wasn't slow. It was just unexpected as to like who won. And then the top 10 was also very unexpected, despite those times being exactly what men run in the past there. The women, on the other hand, it was our fastest top 10 ever. All 10 women running under 26 hours, I believe, which was probably well over an hour and a half to 2 hour improvement of the top 10 from last year. Courtney breaking the course record. People like Sabrina Stanley, for example.
Katie breaking Courtney's course record.
Insane. People like Sabrina Stanley running like 90-minute PR, Lucy Bartholomew running 90-minute
Lucy as well,
PR, and Lucy like still being like, I'll say just 10th place in quotation marks, but I'm sure she was coming into this race thinking, if I run 90 minutes faster, 90 minutes to 2 hours faster, this will definitely be like a, let's say like 5th place time, because it always is.
Sure.
But yeah, 10th place again, which was a stellar race for her, just perfectly executed all day long as well. So I thought the women's race versus the men's race was pretty interesting. We didn't see really a ton of the top women DNF. We had a handful, yes, but not. I think the men's was over like a 65% DNF rate of the top elites, whereas the women's was maybe like 45%, which is pretty cool to see that women the elite women stick it out. I see them fading a bit, a few of them, but altogether, like I would say you look at that top 10 and you're like, I would have put any of those people in my top 10. Whereas the men's side, maybe a little less so.
It's interesting though, still we're at the point, even though you say that, I'm hearing people's recaps going, I thought I was like towards the back. Like so many people must have passed me by now. I'm suffering. I'm like walking these sections and you're still like 9th overall, right? Or 9th women, right? So it's like, there's still room to improve those times on the women's side where it almost feels like the people that are even in the top 10 going like, wow, I'm sure maybe like Lucy ran at 90 minutes faster than last year, but last year she had a really tough year. So it's like this, how much room for improvement is there on the women's side? It just, I think that's really interesting.
I completely agree. Like one of the comments I made on somewhere the last week was, I think it's harder to be in the top 10 at Western States than it is at UTMB these days.
Interesting.
As a woman, at least. I felt that way about my races last year. And like even coming into Western States this year, like hanging on to a 10th place finish at Western States this year is pretty challenging given the field. I would feel a little bit more confident getting in the top 10 at UTMB. And that's interesting because it's exactly what you just said. I had a really imperfect day at UTMB last year. And it's like, it's tough to say that when you have a good day on paper where you place 8th and it was solid. But like, I know for me what my best day is and what a good day is. And what I had at UTMB last year was like, it was good enough. But I saw areas of my race where like I can improve by an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I think there's a lot of women that were running this year that probably felt similarly. And they probably even feel similarly about their races this year. Like, dang, I actually slowed down and I have a lot of time I can gain there. One of my favorite races to follow this year was Ruth Croft. I think there's a lot of conversations these days about like, you need to start off fast. You need to be in it to be competitive. You need to really be with that lead pack. And like, yes, Ruth was in the mix all day long, but she was as far back as like 7th place at really important aid stations early on. And she ran almost a perfectly even split race, which was
which never happens. That might be historic there. Yeah. That might be the first only. What's interesting about that is a totally different way. Ruth never races like that. Like Ruth races from the front. She goes out to win. She's trying to set the course record, whatever. And it's really interesting that she kind of held back. I wonder her recap of the day. I haven't talked to her about it or read anything about it yet, but I mean, what a performance. And she passed Marianne like so late in the day. I mean, did you see the pass? That was awesome that I got caught on camera.
I'm so glad we get to see that. Yeah, because I think Ruth ran the style of race that you don't normally see run by people who get on the podium at UTMB. Like she really, really moved her way up in the second half, picking people off. And I'm wondering with her if like she knew exactly what she could run at UTMB and she knew her best way of getting there was racing the way she did. So maybe it kept her out of touch with Katie. And honestly, like that's okay because I feel like her run on any other day obviously would have won it, but would have been probably close to a course record, which is really freaking cool.
Yeah. I mean, back to kind of the men too, which I think is an anomaly here is Ludo, right? So he was 47th at 40K and then finished in 5th. So it was the same kind of like that Ruth, we're like different. Like Ruth at least was in the top 10 all day, whereas he was like way back and then just picked people off, which we talk about can't happen anymore, right? But Ludo can pull it off 6 weeks after a course record at Hard Rock. It's pretty damn impressive. So I think I guess what it comes to show is that we can, in media, we can talk about kind of these themes that we see in sport and trail running, but like it doesn't always shake out, right? Like it just sometimes you always get surprised.
Totally.
Vincent Bouillard was definitely surprised to every person, probably in the world. It sounds like to himself. It was pretty awesome to see a rising star, and him being so shocked about that win. Pretty cool. And what a win for Hoka also.
Definitely.
Unexpected win.
It's really cool to see somebody too that works professionally full time and isn't somebody that, yes, I know he dedicates a lot of his time to his training and executing a race like this, but it's not the end all be all for him. And just the balance he has is extremely inspiring. And I think it speaks a little bit to the fact, like, sometimes I lose a little bit of hope in like my position in the sport in some ways when I see like a race like Western States that nearly the entire top 10 are people who are going full-time, all in professional in the sport. And sometimes it's easy to lose a little bit of hope. Like, is that what you need to do to be at the top? And I think Vincent was an example of that's not necessarily true.
This episode is brought to you by Osprey. I see Osprey everywhere, as I'm sure you do too. Whether it's luggage, kids carriers, or running packs, Osprey is the one-stop shop for adventure. My current favorite for backpacking is the Aura LT50 for lighter weight, multi-day overnight trips where comfort and ventilation are critical. It has an anti-gravity suspension that delivers a weight-defying fit that seamlessly envelopes your back and hips. Talk about comfort. The pack also has easy-to-use side pockets, trekking pole attachment, and integrated rain cover. And it's made with recycled materials. Head over to osprey.com and click on their tool, Pack Finder, to find the perfect pack for you. I was just talking about this yesterday, where I'm like, how am I ever going to get back to competitive running when I'm like running 6 miles going like, this is kind of hard.
Yeah, no, totally.
Like getting back into running shape, going like, whew, I got a long way to go and I'm working way too much. And this whole parenting thing, like, oh yeah. Nobody does this anymore. It feels like there has been this change in professionalism in the sport, which I'm all for. I love that, like, frankly, contracts are bigger and better, and athletes can put their, like, make a livelihood off of doing the sport that they deserve to make a livelihood off of. And they're making money for their brands, and they should be. But it's also like, when you're not in that tier, it's like, how do you ever get in that tier if you aren't doing the full recovery and you're not, doing all the things you have to be doing? But then you look at Vincent and you're like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm inspired.
So inspiring.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So inspired. Okay. Do we want to talk at all about CCC or OCC? Should we touch on them?
Yeah, let's touch on them. You were probably following along from home quite a bit for those. OCC, I was able to be on course at Col de Balme for the lead. I think I was there through at least the top 20 women, which was fun. I was there. My parents joined me out in Chamonix this year, and I got to tour them around. So I was like touring them around, crewing my, kind of trying to keep a balance with it all, and took them up to Col de Balme to see the runners, which was really cool. I think my dad said,
okay, what does the 20th woman look like running OCC compared to the 20th woman at UTMB?
It's insane. Like, I'm up there. Yeah, I'm up there just evaluating, like, being like, what do I look like when I run 50K? Like, I can freaking walk in this climb, and they're just like, because there's a climb coming up to Col de Balme that there's like this big like scream tunnel that you go through of people, and they're just all running it. They all, like, that was a dynamic race, and it was really interesting to see kind of like the carnage throughout. Like, you could almost tell up at Col de Balme who probably wasn't going to make it, because this was a long climb up there. And
we needed you to, like, as an I Run Far witness.
I know
is what we needed.
Like, what did I Run Far the one time said about me? She looks okay. Just okay. So I could have been up there like, oh, this person looks just okay. So it was, I think I was up there, it's about 20 miles to go, and you've got a descent into Argentier, and then the last, like, kind of the climb from Argentier to the finish is pretty tough, and it's really technical with some uphill, downhill, and an uphill to La Flégère, and there's a lot that can happen. And I think we saw a lot of movement on both sides of the field, and a lot of carnage from that 20 mile to go spot on, which was cool to see. We saw Tabor Hemming go out like really assertively in the women's race, which was amazing to see. And from reading some of her reports, like, she felt so confident in doing that and felt so good, and was like truly having the race of her life before she had some little things come up and prevent her from continuing on, and ended up ultimately dropping at Argentier. But she was a fun one to follow. Danny Moreno, the way that she runs, so gutsy. I think I told somebody, I was like, oh, Danny, like, looks like she's kind of hanging on at Bacol de Balm. And then to see her like stay there / move up and send the final downhill. I think her and Caitlin Fielder sent the final downhill from La Flégère, and I think the two fastest times ever. And if you run that and you see the times that they put down on that descent, it's mind blowing. Danny was asking people on social media if they had a video of it, and I told her to send it my way if she gets it, because like Danny is 100% my inspiration in races when I think about like sending a downhill to the finish somewhere. She's
just no shit. Like she just go like absolutely throws herself over any ledge.
Yes.
And it's just like, take me, it's worth it.
Totally. So
she's so gritty.
I love seeing finishes like that. And especially like, I think OCC, it was a style of race on the women's side, especially that like, it wasn't over till it was over. And there was so much movement. Like I want to say it was only just a few minutes separated first through 6 or 7 in that race. And the top 20 the top 10 was the smallest gap between first through 10th that they've ever had. And I think it paralleled the men's race, if not was a little quicker, which is cool to see.
Well, what I think is interesting too is that Meow had she's incredible. Just like what a freaking shredder. But she won by 6 minutes.
Dominant.
Which, that's a lot in that kind of a race, because then it's like from Judith to Clementine. So like, second to third was 2 minutes. Fourth and fifth, Sarah Alonso, Caitlin Fielder, separated by 30 seconds. Ugh. It's like, oh my God, it was so tight. And then, Danny just like a minute behind that. It felt as if it was so tight. But then first place, Meow, was like 6 minutes. Yeah. That's like incredible.
Yeah, she ran away with it and just so composed. Yeah. I think what was cool was, the whole OCC podium from last year all won their races, an OCC, CCC.
I know. I saw that picture. Did you see that where they're all together hugging and you're just like, come on.
Yeah, just the best of the best. So really cool to see just so good. A perfectly executed race from her. So cool. I can't imagine the racing dynamics in something like OCC. Just like, it seems so cutthroat, honestly. And like, you don't have room to make any mistakes. And like, even reading about Danny's race, she's like, I needed to have my best day on this day to win this. And I had a good day, but not my best. And I just like look at her splits and I'm like, how is that a good day?
Right. Well, I think she's chasing that. She's gotten third at OCC. And I think that was a huge breakthrough performance for her. And I think looking back, she's like, okay, I can do that and better, once you get a podium, it's like, well, now I want to win. God, and Danny cares. Talk about cool to care. Danny Moreno is one of those people that just deeply cares, and I love it about her. Just huge shout out to Danny. Obviously a friend of mine and like Mammoth Lakes local. So like she was repping hard. But it was, I just think that the guts that you need to throw down in a 50K championship style race is just wild. And these people are so fit. It's crazy. Oh. Yeah, pretty crazy. And then Eli Hemming, American, taking the win.
Just dominant.
He's got to be one of the best in that distance ever.
Yeah,
right?
I think so. And I think just the way he did it. And I think like he ended up hanging on at the end and had that extra edge in the last few miles there to really make sure he had it. But I think going up to La Flégère, I remember there were people, I think Eli took a second on the climb and people were like, oh no, what's happening? But he held on, and I would be honestly afraid to be getting chased by Francesco Pupi in the last little bit. He is dominant at OCC. He knows exactly what you need to do from that Argentier section to the finish, and like picked off people this year and ran very similarly to how he did last year. And it's got to be bittersweet for him to get another second place there.
Man, the finish line photos. See, this is it. Like when you're back home and not there, I wasn't there at the finish line like I was last year, being able to see it in person. So I'm just like trying to see all of the images, all the videos, and just like soaking it up. But oh man, Poopy's like finish line and just absolutely collapsing and destroying his soul, just trying to get to that finish line in front of Eli, and couldn't get there. But yeah, it's really, really fun to watch for sure. Okay, CCC. What were your takeaways?
Oh, man, it was so my in full transparency going into like with the women's race of CCC and UTMB this year, I felt like all the like big headliners were running UTMB, and I was like, I feel like CCC isn't quite as competitive as it's been. I think the most competitive year at CCC was 2 years ago. The year when we had, I think there was like 6 Americans in the top 10 or 5 Americans in the top 10. Even if you look at the times, like that is the fastest the women's top 10 at CCC has ever been. And so I felt like CCC this year on the women's side was completely wide open, with the exception likely of Tony McCann having a stellar day. I thought she would win it. It was her first 100K, so a little unpredictable. But I felt like the rest of the top 10 was like, it wasn't going to be as.
She won it by 14 minutes.
Yeah.
Tony just, led from the gun and
she did great. Like for your first 100K too, like to win CCC, win it in one of the fastest times ever. Like, inspired.
We'll talk about commitment. She lives there, right? So these are her trails. She knows that like the back of her hand, and she's like knows what she can throw down. And I think she was just, she wasn't racing anybody else but her best time, which is pretty impressive. She's definitely an inspiration to me. I met her last year after her win and chatting with her, and she at OCC, her win, and she had spent the like 2 months prior on the bike. And because I think it was a broken clavicle anyway, and it was really inspiring to watch her come back and win OCC. And so for me, just like, okay, Tony, you're now like, I'm a fan,
Such a fan.
So you kind of catch on to these stories of people doing incredible things when you're like in their similar shoes.
Yeah,
you're
100%.
Like, okay, if you can win OCC, what can I do? And then, you can win CCC. What can I do? Yeah. Anyways, Tony's awesome.
100%. Yeah. What were your takeaways of CCC following along?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Heather Jackson fan. I'm like so stoked to watch her. I think that was actually a massive breakthrough performance for her. She's like, she's had an insane year. I think Heather is definitely one of the ultra runners of the year on the American side. She's put together just a really, just quite a year. I mean, to get fifth at that CCC was
and I think it's interesting. Like somebody had said last week in one of the forums I was following along in that, like, would you have ever expected Heather to be higher at CCC than she was at Western States this year? And like, I would have said no. I would have, like, I think I would have slated her in the top 10 at CCC, maybe not quite as high as fifth, but she did so well. And like, what a confidence boost for her. I think she came out to OCC last year and I believe had a top 20 finish there and put in a lot of work, just really dedicated to getting better on trails this year. And like CCC, like the trails in and around Chamonix, there's a lot of sections that are cruisy, but there's a lot of sections that are pretty technical for somebody that's not that used to technical trails, and especially in the last like 10 miles. So for her to push and hang on and have a great fifth place finish there, I agree, it was really awesome to see.
It was funny because I was literally on her, sending her a DM going, hey, come out for the Mammoth Tough. It's a 100-mile gravel race that I'm racing. Come out for the Mammoth Tough. And then the week later, do Mammoth Trail Fest. Like, that'd be awesome. Stay with me, whatever. And I was like, all excited about this. This was, I don't know, whatever it was when I sent it to her. And then I was like, oh, she's running CCC. Like, God, this woman just races all the time, I feel like she's everywhere. But yeah, she put this one together. Something that's interesting. So Rod Favard, fan fave, who announced that he was sponsored by Hoka, was not planning on racing CCC, which I thought was interesting that he decided to go out because Hoka puts up all the bells and whistles for their athletes for that week. And I think it's pretty cool. Like, but I will say from a competitor standpoint, that means to me that like not all the Hoka athletes are thinking of this as their A race. Like sometimes they just, and that might've been Heather last year where you're put up, you're like, have all these fun Hoka parties. It's like a bonding experience. It's a team experience. It's all expenses paid. And it's just like, go run and have fun. And that's kind of, I think how Rod was like, I have nothing to prove. What I just did at Western States, like, sealed the deal with Hoka, but I don't have anything to prove. I wasn't planning on doing this. But they were like, bring a +1, take, let's make it a vacation. And he's like, okay, so anyways, I thought that was kind of interesting. But Heather clearly this year was was really going for it. And it was an A race, you know, and it's just interesting now to know that like sometimes it's a last minute decision for some of these athletes.
Yeah. And it's nice to like have that time if you're like not going to be taking it as your full A race. Like that's a great recon year for you to come back and really focus on it in the following year.
Totally.
Yeah, I will say, I think on the men's side, it seemed to be a lot of the guys who were doubling back from Western states were in CCC versus UTMB, whereas a lot of the women who were doubling back from Western states were in UTMB and not CCC. I think as a result, that led to a lot of American men in CCC. I think they had a pack as big as like 9 to 10 American men deep at one point early on in the race. But I think it also led to several runners feeling like I feel like feeling like they weren't quite in it and didn't quite have the heart that they would have wanted to otherwise because Western states kind of took it all out of them this year. So I feel like we saw the results of the double a lot more in the men's races than we did in the women's races.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, to your point, I mean, to our point earlier, is that maybe there's still some more room for that for women's top 10, right? Like, I think that's just going to keep going down every year, and no one should be basing their splits off the year prior. Ever again.
Totally.
Really.
You know, and it makes sense too, because like men have saturated the field for a long time. And we saw jumps in performances by like leaps and bounds over the years, especially across the men's field. Women are finally like, we're at that point now where we're seeing the leaps and bounds in the men's field we're seeing like very incremental improvements, whereas the women's side, we're seeing huge jumps. And I think it's due to a variety of things. I think the level of competition is increasing. The number of women coming to the sport is increasing. They're more supported. Information is just like widespread with social media. So I think people are able to glean a lot from other professionals across the field and able to implement those changes and racing strategies, nutrition strategies a lot more easily because they're available. So I think, and like shoe technology too, and gear technology is improving. So I think we're seeing all those things at the perfect time for women to really like increase how like their performance is relative to the men's.
Yeah. I mean, I think fueling is a massive part of that too. Whereas like historically, maybe that wasn't a focus and now it really is, you know, it's everybody's focus.
It's interesting too. Cause I will say, I think Western states there's several variables at play at Western states that I think once you nail them, you nail them. I think at races like CCC and UTMB, there's a lot of variables as well, but they're a lot more challenging to nail than at Western states. And I think we kind of see that with the amount of like carnage and fading between Western states and the UTMB races like we did this year. Like Western states, nearly every person nailed it this year. And we saw a lot of people not nail it at these races. And maybe it's because they raced prior, but also I think it's like nutrition isn't as straightforward as a really humid day out in Chamonix, but across CCC and UTMB. For CCC, it was exceptionally hot too. So it was hot and humid. And I think as we're learning more about nutrition, like the nutrition strategies that we implement at Western states, when we're able to cool our bodies all day long, it's a lot harder to do those same nutrition strategies in a hot and humid environment. Like Western states is just hot.
And they don't have ice the same way. Like at Western states, it's a part of the race is that you're always wet and you're always covered in ice, but it's like just hasn't, even though they had the heat warnings for UTMB and they had to carry mandatory heat kit. Yeah. I don't even know what that entailed, but they had to carry it. What did that entail?
You had to have 2 liters capacity for water. You had to have sunscreen. You had to have sunglasses, and you had to have the ability to cover your neck. So that could have been like a ball cap with a buff, or it had to be a desert cap.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I'm imagining everybody at the expo like searching for those hats.
Exactly. I think I saw like Adidas must have had these hats made or something. I saw one of the runners with like the smallest little square of buff coming out of the back of one of their like ball caps, and that was probably good for the heat kit. So you even like the way that people are so extremely like, minimal with their gear here. It's really cool to see and learn a little bit. But yeah, I think just that type of weather, I personally think that there's a lot of runners who train in the US who train in the Mountain West, and they might have been training over in Chamonix this year for UTMB where it was quite humid, but a lot of them don't have experience racing in humid conditions. And I think, Chamonix wasn't like peak East Coast of the US humidity levels, but it was still really humid. And like just how hot and sweaty we saw all the runners coming in at like pretty early aid stations, I think was a variable that probably messed up some nutrition management plans quite a bit as well. And I think being able to troubleshoot in the moment what's going on, what's going wrong, why it's going wrong, what can I alter or change to make sure this fixes over the course of the next 10 miles. It's tough to do when you're racing at the highest level.
Right. So what were your takeaways for learnings for next year? Because it sounds like Mike got into UTMB this year. It sounds like Leah's running next year. Now we know your game plan. Yeah. Perfect. What will you do different?
Yeah. So I think next year I've been pretty vocal about not doing Western States for taking a year.
But you also had been vocal about that the year before. I don't take it. You're going to be back.
I might we'll see if I'll take my top 10 spot. We'll see. And then we'll figure it out from there. But I think going into it without having Western States and like having a more like mountain focus, spending the last month out in Switzerland was just awesome and inspiring and like opened my eyes to all the mountain races that exist out in the world that aren't UTMB and like aren't what we're used to. And I just really want to spend a year playing in the mountains more. Like the Eiger trail races, I spent a lot of time out on that course in August.
And then so pretty out there. I've been there too.
The Matterhorn All Tracks courses. We did a lot of those trails while we were spending some time in Zermatt, and we ended up doing a little vertical race out there called the Verdi Night. That was part of their race, which was so much fun. So just getting to see that type of terrain, I want to spend a lot more time in mountain races next year. And I would love to do UTMB. I think for me, last year, just looking back, I've been telling Mike, I'm like, I think if I would have lined up at UTMB this year, despite there being like one less week between Western States and UTMB, this year I actually feel a lot more prepared right now to run UTMB and fitter to run UTMB than I did last year. And I think a lot of that had to do with like being able to put in really good training for 3 straight weeks out in the Alps. Whereas last year after Western States, like just working a lot and just not quite having that same like recovery and
working. That's the problem, Leah. You need to just not work.
I know. I start
my new job on Monday. What are you calling it? You're like, what is it? Your staycation? What do you call it when you're in between? Your fun employment. There it is.
So I think, next year, more mountain focus. Honestly, like a little bit more volume in my training to really, or like more focused volume. Like last year, my quads died pretty dramatically at UTMB at like mile 75. So I think just having more volume or more focused on like downhill training would be awesome. Like I think I have so much time to make up in the last 25 miles that I lost last year. So ideally like picking away the ways that I can do that better. And I think this year I've been challenging myself and like being in the race a little bit more and less of like working my way up from the back. And I think we're going to hopefully chat with Emily Hawgood next week. And I love her style of racing that we've seen over the last couple of years. Like she puts herself in it.
God, talk about consistency.
She's so consistent. She puts herself in it. She might falter a little bit and like lose a spot here and there, but like she battles and she puts herself in a position to battle. And it's really amazing to see. I also like the way Katie Scheid races. I like honestly don't think I could ever do from like just like the aggression and confidence that Katie has raced with in the last year has been really inspiring. Like I was telling somebody the other day, it's like, yes, I think she's improved a ton because of her like really focused training the last 2 years. But I also think there's a mental side of things that she's worked on that has really aided in this like massive jump in performance. So I think just that level of confidence that she's running with and racing with, I think if more people had that, we'd see times get even faster. So hopefully working on like the confidence and like the mental side of training as well. And just being confident, staying in it and racing with the competitors rather than later on in the race is something like I'd like to work on.
The typical Leah from the behind, coming from behind. You do not want Leah behind you on that close. But that's what you're known for. But it's interesting because it's like, what if you use that energy just a little earlier, right? Like what would change? And you've done that before. Like you play around with that. Like at Western States, 2 years ago, that was one of your tactics is like, that's how you raced it. And it's just interesting. And it's kind of like just because it didn't maybe work exactly the way you had hoped, like the first time, doesn't mean it won't in the future. True. And I think that mental aspect, like you talk about, just believing that you belong and that you deserve to be at the front, because you do, and I mean, I think it's really guts. Like Katie wasn't there to win. She was there to set a course record. And you could tell that from the beginning. And it is that Katie Courtney dynamic is fun right now in sport. And I feel like we've all wanted that. Like it's all just been about Courtney for the last, 8 years? It's just Courtney is dominating everything. And I have heard some of that where it's like, the women's race isn't as fun to watch because just Courtney dominates, right? Well, it's getting more and more interesting. And if you're not here for the women's race, you better show up because it is fire. And people like Katie are really, improving that concept wrong. So anyway, very fun. I love this conversation. I feel like I could talk to you about this for hours and hours. Leah, I wish I was there with you.
I wish you were there with me. I will say I messaged Pete the other night. I said I was really missing my A crew out there this weekend because I was crewing largely by myself with like my parents joined me for some of them. But it's a lot. And UTMB is not easy to crew. And indebted to you and Pete after crewing me last year and even offering me your knee scooter at the finish line when I could not stand up.
Which was so smart. I'm like, I should just bring that to every race, Oh my gosh.
The best.
Yeah, that was like A+ crew right there. But no, I don't ever want to see that thing again. I burned it.
But I think we're going to see you at a start line of one of the UTMB races next year, Katie, and it's going to be so much to celebrate.
I hope so. I really hope so. I definitely have the bug. I believe in it. I want to be there. I also want them to step up a lot of what they need to do, but they're working on it and they're listening, which is big. So, I think that we could probably end there. Leah, thanks for just kind of like sharing your expertise. It's really fun to hear your words of wisdom and kind of your take on the in-person fun and fanatic of all that is UTMB week. So this was a good time.
Thanks. And I'm so excited to see you again out there next year, Katie.
Hope so. Till next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode on the Trail Network podcast. We're so happy you're with us, and we love to hear from you. So please subscribe, whatever you do from wherever you listen to us. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us a message on Instagram if you've got any feedback or have any recommendations for topics to cover in future episodes. We love our listeners, and we're really grateful that you're here. Until next time.